Thank you very much. I would like to open the general discussion. Adrian?
I actually wanted to go back to Ford's talk, if that's all right. So there was something I didn't quite understand about the sort of argument, right? So I take it that the sort of structure of the setup is something like, at least on some versions of Gaia, we want to say that Gaia is a unit of selection. Basic problem, there isn't a population. In order to be a unit of a selection, it's got to be a member of a population. The move, which I really like, is to point out that we can think about evolution, natural selection in terms of a decrease in the total entities. So whittling away at the denominator as opposed to increasing the proportion in the numerator. Really, really cool. But it wasn't immediately obvious to me how that somehow gave me a population, right? And the three solutions you gave, one had a population, and that was the clade selection example. But that wasn't giving me, that was suddenly I had a big thing, namely life, but the environment was still the Earth, right? I wasn't getting the atmosphere in there in any, in this, that wasn't the thing that was the unit of selection in that case. It was clearly very important, right? But it's, and I guess I was worried that that one was the only one that seems to suddenly give me a population and thus solve the problem. But two, that one, you know, Gaia means a whole bunch of different things to different people, but it didn't quite strike me as sufficient for being Gaia because it wasn't bringing it was just the biosphere, as it were. It wasn't bringing in sort of the more planetary level sort of stuff. So yeah, that's, hopefully you can.
Well, the second question first. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just talking about the biotic parts of Gaia. And then I would use something like niche construction to deal with the abiotic parts. I mean, I think that's fine. Certainly Lovelock conceived of it as the whole thing, but I can easily divide those up, I think. And secondly, it really was the differential reproduction aspect of traditional, the received view, basically, that I was critiquing. For the population problem, I agree that only the second of those alternatives has, well, both the second and the third actually explain populations. So it's only ITSNOTS that has a problem with populations. And then I would have to revert to a Chopra and Lineweaver kind of solution where I'd say, well, yeah, I have this thought experiment, you know, you're the flea on the back of a dog, and you've got this theory about how fleas evolved and everything, and then somebody says, well, God, look how relevant this dog is to us. I mean, dog is perfect. And the one flea would say to the other, yeah, but do you see any other dogs? So that's sort of my thought experiment. But there could be other Gaias, and certainly we've heard talks about how they actually communicate with each other. So that's not a real problem.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I agree with another thing. So one of the things I kind of liked what you said, because I think we might think of it similarly here, where one of the things that actually kind of baffles me about the whole setup of trying to test the Gaia stuff in terms of it being a unit of selection as opposed to, say, a product of selection, is that it struck me that what's supposed to hang on the Gaia hypothesis, I take it, is something like this sort of, you know, there's this bunch of global level stabilizing feedbacks that, you know, life has evolved to. And it seems like you can just vaguely wave your hand and say niche construction. And that seems to, at least conceptually, very straightforwardly, give me a model that explains how these things might evolve without having to sort of talk about whether there are other dogs as fleas. It seems like the flea can say, regardless of whether there are other dogs, I can still give you this, I can still tell you why it is that dog level systems are critically important for my survival.
No, I think my goal is much more limited and purely philosophical in that sense, that the objection to early Darwinists, by Darwinists, including me, to the Gaia hypothesis was it was impossible in theory, that, you know, our understanding of evolution by natural selection didn't allow for there to be such entities. So all I'm really trying to do is saying there is a legitimate expression of evolution by natural selection if Darwin would accept differential persistence as well as differential reproduction, which would it makes a how possibly argument. There is no how actually argument. I mean, how to get from there to an how actually argument, I don't know.
Thanks, yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so the dogs are definitely the favorite example of the conference. Letitia.
So one of the themes that I've sort of noticed throughout the conference, at least the bits of it I've been able to attend, or one of the, I guess, not so much overt themes, but things in the background, which is what I take to be a kind of genealogical question of, you know, how the stories we tell about what is the case justify our present sense of ourselves and how we see our future, right? And this seems to me to be kind of why the Gaia hypothesis is contemporary again. I mean, you know, it came up in a particular political moment and was had this weird backlash against it, which seemed somewhat political in part because it was tied up with a growing feminist movement and a growing ecological movement, which was seen as anti-scientific. And so you had kind of science warsy thing that then comes out of it. But I think the current concern is surely one about how we tell stories about where we are and who we are, and how that implies how we should live. And it just seems to me that all of these origin stories have this genealogical component, and you know, it should be overt.
Yeah, I think it actually crossed my mind that in the origins of life science, it's sort of the other way around. The latest biotechnology that we employ to improve our lives is immediately a new tool to sort of build kind of a plausibility scenarios for various stages in the origin of life. So it kind of goes so in a, maybe in the opposite direction in that particular case. But yeah, it's really sort of interesting. There's always this assumption that has to do with the present moment from which we sort of try to scan the past in various ways. Yeah, I agree. Predrag?
Just a continuation to what you're saying. A question basically maybe to Professor Doolittle or to Sergio or to Milan or other people. What's the time required from the origin of life, maybe first Luca and something like that, and Gaia as a planetary system? Is this really an evolutionary obstacle? I think if we look at our evolution between Luca and Gaia, I don't know how long. How long, Professor Doolittle, do you estimate it took between Luca and the first form of Gaia?
I have no idea, really. Gosh, billion years?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, I mean, yeah, maybe. But I'm sure it was all prokaryotic. I agree with you that there was probably a prokaryotic Gaia before. But I mean, Gaia is not an organism. Well, insofar as Gaia is like an organism, Gaia is like an organism in the sense that it could be killed. So,
but we can't kill Gaia, can we?
Well,
prokaryotic.
We're trying.
Maybe we shouldn't test that hypothesis.
No, a thought experiment. Thought experiment. I mean,
I know.
It's allowed to think.
Yeah.
Maybe Milan has a comment. No, on this.
Well, perhaps I don't know about humans. Maybe we don't have that amount of control over physical environment yet, but astrophysical processes certainly can.
Yeah.
So there are, I mean, not only some catastrophic processes like supernova explosions or gamma ray bursts, but also rather normal, under quotation mark, evolution of stars along main sequence. So actually that's the reason why people like Lovelock himself and Ken Caldera and others tries to calculate how long Earth's biosphere has left, again, without any intentional influence on part of the humans, but solely due to wet greenhouse effect and other consequences of solar evolution. So it's probably something on the order of 1.1 billion years, which is much less than those 7 billion years which are left for solar for the lifetime of the sun itself. So actually, there are astrophysical processes which are expected to regulate birth and death, if you wish, of Gaias on a larger, for instance, the Milky Way or any other galaxy scale.
Great, thank you. Maybe one more, Craig. Well, Mel as well, but Craig first.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So, I'm not super familiar with work on the Gaia hypothesis. So it looks like there's at least some evidence that the carbon cycle, the modern carbon cycle, actually goes back was already established about 4 billion years ago. Could something like that be an indicator that Gaia had already started there, or is that even a coherent question of when it started?
Were you asking that question too? I'm not sure. But if you were asking it to me, I think we can't. That's where the selection hypotheses and the anthropic principle get confused in my head, because clearly, if there weren't a carbon cycle, we wouldn't be here to even ask whether there's a carbon cycle. So, of course, there was a carbon cycle, duh. But yeah.
Well, it's surprising though that it was already established.
Yeah,
Right? That's
maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Right.
Mel, please.
Yes, so there was a question in the chat of Sergio, who is asking to myself and Paul-Antoine the difference between causality for biological and physics objects. So from my perspective, the situations between the two fields are very different, because in physics you have mathematized objects and mathematized theoretical determination of the objects. So causality in this sense goes through mathematics and typically by equations, like the fundamental principle of dynamics in classical mechanics. In biology, it's different. So causations, in my sense, go through first constraints that can analyze processes, but also it has a historical dimension in the sense that a constraint, so in a given situation, can enable the emergence of something new. So that's a specific form of causality that we have described with Giuseppe Longo and Stuart Kauffman, and that only makes sense for historical situation. I don't know if Paul-Antoine wants to jump in.
Well, no, I fully agree with you. I think it's completely different, and it's not simply because biological systems are also historical. Well, I think that they get some memories, and you cannot find this in physical systems. And again, they adapt. You have adaptation. And that's why I was asking the question before, because if you say that you have selection at Gaia's level, it means that in a way Gaia has some kind of adaptation. And what does it mean exactly? I don't understand. But well, I think that every biological system is like that. So you have very temporal specificity. You have memory and you have adaptation. You can't find this in physical and chemical system, in my opinion.
Yeah, so maybe I may add, there's this extra layer added to the sort of a causal web or causal interactions that we see in biological systems that we normally don't see in isolated physical systems. It's a result of sort of evolutionary processes and also very specific conditions in which complexity actually rises. But,
I think that's what I was trying to say in my comments about Tim Linton. That a physicist.
Sorry, because I don't understand very well English with American accent. So
Oh, okay.
sorry, I'm just a stupid
what I was
French guy.
Trying to say in my comments about Tim Linton was that it could be that for physical reasons or for cybernetic reasons or something that global homeostasis is inevitable. And it still wouldn't satisfy Darwinists because they want it to be the product of selection.
Yeah.
So there is as Dr. Mayo was saying, our previous speaker, I think there's a difference between explanation in physics and explanation in biology, and adaptation is very much important part of, you know, whether does Gaia have adaptations? That's really the question.
well, maybe quickly, Predrag. And
Just a very short comment on homeostasis. I mean, homeostasis is a steady state, nothing changes. But I think for Gaia is basically homeostasis, that means steady flow, is more applicable because that's in line with evolvability. If we have homeostasis, Gaia wouldn't evolve. I mean, just a comment.